Ray Strand, MD, is quickly becoming one of the world's leading authorities in nutritional medicine. Dr. Strand is an international speaker and consultant on health and preventive medicine, as well as the author of What Your Doctor Doesn't Know About Nutritional Medicine May Be Killing You. A graduate of the University of Colorado Medical School, Dr. Strand has been in private family practice for over 30 years. This video is the culmination of the doctor's last 7 years dedicated to the emerging field of nutritional medicine.
When I was about 38 years old, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a chronic pain and fatigue syndrome. If you are diagnosed with that, the doctors will pretty much tell you there's nothing that can be done, there's no cure, and they usually start you on a series of different medications. Some to help you sleep at night, because with this disorder you really don't get a good night's sleep, you don't get good rest. Something for the tight muscle bands, like a muscle relaxer. Of course, anti-inflammatories for the pain. There's a lot of pain. It can be muscular or in the joints. And then, of course, I had the sinus infections and the allergies, so I was on some drugs for that. And then I developed asthma, so I had to start taking drugs for that. And then in 1995, I had a big crash. I had a severe pneumonia that ended up totally knocking me out. And I had to be on IV antibiotics for weeks, and I ended up with a severe asthmatic condition and chronic fatigue syndrome. This was a very sad time in our lives. My children were still young, and they had to take turns staying home with me. This went on for several months. And my husband was very worried. He consulted with all of the physicians that he knew of. I had 4 different specialists that were trying to figure out what my problem was and why I couldn't get well. And when my husband finally asked, "How long will this last?" the doctor said, well, it could be 6 months, it could be a year, or she could be this way the rest of her life. When you've lost your health, it affects everything. It's not just you, it's your family. You cannot meet the needs of your children. You can't take care of the household. You certainly can't go out and enjoy life and take long walks and stay up for movies at night and take trips. I often recall when we would go on a trip, we had to have a van so I could sleep in the van all the way when we drove. As soon as I got into the car, I fell asleep. Every time I took a trip, if we went on a holiday and we flew on a plane, I would end up with sinus infections and bronchitis and usually be in bed the whole time my family was out playing on the beach. It was very, very difficult. I felt very concerned about my health in that I just knew that I wasn't like everybody else, but I didn't know what to do about it, and I didn't want to be there. In 1995, I just recovered from the pneumonia, I had someone who cared for me very much and called and started talking to me about taking some vitamins. And of course, I couldn't imagine how vitamins could help me, being married to a physician, but I talked to her a little bit, and I said, well, I'll tell you what I'll do. These sound like they're different, so I'll talk to my husband and see if he'll give me permission to take vitamins. Because always when I asked him about taking nutritional supplements, he would say, there's no evidence, you can get everything you need out of your food, it just creates expensive urine. And quite frankly, I thought he would laugh at me if I brought that up. But to my surprise, he did not laugh. He said, honey, you can do anything you want to. I have no more options, I have no more answers, I don't know what to do. You see, he felt very bad about my health situation. Here he is, a medical doctor, and he can't even help his own wife. Right before his eyes, I began to respond to this nutrition. And within a few days, I started feeling a little better. I started getting up a little more. Pretty soon, I was out with him in the car. And within 3 weeks, I was starting to go off some of the medications that I had been on. Within 3 months, he thought I looked better than I'd been in 10 or 15 years. 6 months, I was better. A year, 2 years, 3 years. Every single year, my health improves. When my husband saw what happened to me, he called in 5 of his worst fibromyalgia patients. the ones that would come into him quite often and say, Dr. Strand, isn't there anything that you have, any other ideas you have? And at that point, he didn't. He called them in and he found out, or he said to them, I don't know if these will help you, but they help my wife and I think they're worth a try. When all of those people began to respond, those patients, he said, what in the world is going on here? Why don't I know about this? So he came home every single night and he searched the internet, he went on Medline, he did tons of research and found out there's literally thousands of studies that prove that taking nutritional supplements has a health benefit, and with several different of the chronic degenerative diseases and fibromyalgia being one of those. So it's been an amazing journey, and it was at that point that he decided, now that he knows what he knows, that he couldn't stop telling people this is an amazing tool for a physician to have in his toolbox to offer building up the body's own natural defense system through nutritional supplementation, and we're going to dedicate the next 20 or 25 years and talk to people about this. Hopefully it'll come around where in the next 5 years everybody will know about it. But I would love to introduce my husband, Dr. Ray Strand. He's got some amazing information to share with you about that medical evidence and how you can be proactive with your health. If you're healthy, take a serious look. If you're struggling with your health right now, listen to what he has to say. There's a good chance you've got great hope in this information. So.
Well, thank you. I'll tell you what, it's kind of humbling for a doctor to see his wife improve with horror vitamins. You know, it's here we had her on 9 different drugs. She couldn't get any better. And we were sitting there just watching my wife. Couldn't even get out of bed for more than 2 hours a day. And I have to say, it was like the Lord took a wet noodle and slapped me across the face and said, pay attention to this. There is something to this, and you need to figure this thing out. After I'd had my 5 worst fibromyalgia patients, in fact, one of those was diagnosed at Mayo Clinic, had gone to 2 pain clinics, had suffered miserably, was on hard narcotic medication, not by me, but by Mayo Clinic. And it turned around and she had tried to commit suicide the year before and almost was successful. Turned around and she basically just had nothing in her life. She couldn't do anything. Got her on this nutritional program that my wife had started, and lo and behold, I get a phone call about 3 months later. And she says, Dr. Strand, and this is on my voice recorder because I wasn't home at the time, says, Dr. Strand, I've got my life back. Thank you so much. Well, you know, that's pretty impressive for a doctor to see a disease that no one is treating. I mean, doctors don't treat chronic fatigue fibromyalgia. All we do is we turn around and we put them on some non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, maybe a little amitriptyline for sleep, an antidepressant, give them a muscle relaxant, and tell them to go home and learn to live with it. I mean, that's it. And anybody who's been here knows that. That's what we face. But what I have found is that it really perked my interest. I started to see changes I hadn't seen. And it was about that time that I went ahead and I actually was down at a bookstore and I looked up and I saw a book written by Dr. Kenneth Cooper. And for those of you who are not familiar with Dr. Cooper, he's the one that got the exercise craze going in the early 70s in the U.S. and in Canada. He actually coined the term aerobics. And here's a book he had written called The Antioxidant Revolution. And I have to be real honest with you. I did not learn much about nutrition, especially nutritional supplementation, in medical school. If any physicians are out here or healthcare providers, I would venture to guess your story's the same. But tonight, I want to take you on a journey that has taken me 7 years to research the medical literature. I have literally reviewed well over 2,000 major medical studies that involve nutritional supplementation and the health benefits in chronic degenerative diseases. Diseases like heart disease, cancer, strokes, diabetes, macular degeneration, Alzheimer's, dementia. And I am going to share that information with you because it is not coming, like Chris said, from these esoteric journals. It's coming from mainstream medical journals like the New England Journal of Medicine, the Journal of American Medical Association, the JAMA, British Lancet, mainstream journals. That's what I'm going to share with you tonight because it's all about health. It's preventive medicine. And this is what we need to look at. Let me ask you a question. How important is your health? How much value do you place on your health? You know, sometimes we don't even talk about it, think about it, or do anything. But I'll tell you what, when my patients lose their health, I can tell you where it sits on their list. It's number one, to try to regain their health. And that's what we all seem, we just assume we're always going to have good health until we lose it. But you know, that's my job as a physician. All I do, day in and day out, are tell and inform my patients that they've lost their health to one extent or the other. One patient, it might just be they developed high blood pressure. The next one, oh, you've got diabetes. The other one, they've just had a heart attack. Or maybe I have to tell them they have cancer. That's what I do, day in and day out. That's my job. Just imagine if you had one automobile that had to last you your entire life. How would you take care of it? You know, would you do the oil changes? Would you fix the brakes when they need to be fixed? When there's that rust on the fender or around the wheel well, would you go out and make sure you had that cut out or painted over and repaired? You know, one car to last you all your life. Think about this. What would happen to that automobile if you took it out and set it under a tree and just left it? And you came back 10 years later. What would that automobile look like? Maybe not too bad. How about 20 years? Come back in 20 years. Now look at, we're talking about the world's strongest material is metal. Would it start to rust out? Would it start to deteriorate, degenerate? You better believe it. You have to take care of it because that's what's happening to you and I. What is happening to us, we are literally rusting inside. That is what's happening. We are having oxidative stress, and that's what we are now finding out is the root cause, the very root cause of these chronic degenerative diseases. The medical literature has shown us beyond any shadow of doubt that oxidative stress is what's causing heart disease, cancer, diabetes, macular degeneration. And what is going on? Just like there is an exhaust that comes from an engine of a car, there's a cellular exhaust that comes from the engine of our cell called the mitochondria. And it is called free radicals. And they're actually charged oxygen molecules. They have at least one unpaired electron in their outer orbit, which gives it an electrical charge and very rapid movement. And if it's not readily neutralized by an antioxidant, it can go on and damage the cell wall, the vessel wall, the proteins, the fats, and even the DNA nucleus of the cell. It has such volatile activity that chemically we can even show that it causes bursts of light inside you. It's a dramatic problem that we all have to deal with. But what we need to know is that the amount of free radicals that you and I produce are not steady. Just by consuming food and metabolizing that food, we're going to create some free radicals. However, Dr. Cooper wrote this book, The Antioxidant Revolution, primarily because he was seeing his super exercisers, those people who had run 20, 30, maybe even 40 marathons in their lifetime, coming in dying prematurely, 45 to 55 years of age, from a heart attack, from a stroke, from cancer. And yet he was their guru. He was telling, although he never recommended excessive exercise, he never discouraged it either. But what was happening is these people were dying prematurely. And why? Have you guys ever watched the marathon runners running down? Do you have marathons up here? We have one in our town. And man, when I watch them run by, man, they don't look real healthy to me. You know, you see that color in their face. I'll be honest with you, that's oxidative stress. Because what Dr. Cooper found out is when you exercise mild to moderately, the number of free radicals you produce goes up just a little bit. But then, if you overdo and really exercise, those free radicals go up off the graph exponentially. That's what we find. So that is the key thing that you start to look at. Well, I don't have too many people in my practice that exercise that much, but boy, I have a lot of people who are under a lot of stress. We live stressful lifestyles, high-pressured, a lot of stress in our lives. Well, we can handle mild to moderate stress, but if we have excessive stress, boy, those free radicals just go up dramatically. It's just a key thing. So what I find is that this is what we're dealing with. But look at all the pollutants in the air, the food, and water. All of these toxins that's in our air, food, and water create excessive free radicals in you. In fact, this generation is exposed to more oxidative stress and the creation of free radicals and the pollutants in our environment than any generation that's ever walked this planet. Then you add to that the sunlight, cigarette smoke, medication. Every drug I prescribe is synthetic. It has to be called a drug, to be approved by our FDA and by your government. In other words, it's a foreign body to the body. And the body's trying to get rid of it, metabolize it out. It causes tremendous increase in oxidative stress, especially the chemotherapeutic drugs. This is what's critical. So here we have a society, because of our heavy medication, our stressful lifestyles, and our polluted environment, you and I have to handle more oxidative free radical damage than any generation. And what I have learned through 7 years of studying the medical literature is that your body's natural defenses are your best defense against oxidative stress and not the drugs I can prescribe. So what we find is a lot of my patients come in looking like this, rusted out, already have degenerative disease, and they're looking at the doctor, "Doctor, save me." And lo and behold, we don't do such a good job. You think about it. Charlton Heston now just announced that he has Alzheimer's dementia early. But do you realize the day we diagnose Alzheimer's dementia, 80% of those brain cells are already gone. Same thing with Parkinson's. Look at Michael J. Fox or Muhammad Ali. You know, we're starting to see them. How good are we doing with them? We're not doing so good. Nutritional supplementation is really not about disease. It's about health. It's about your health. It's about putting a value on your health and learning what you need to do to protect your health. And it's also your best opportunity to regain your health if you've already lost it. This is what I'm going to share with you tonight. So what we do is that we look is that our natural defense system, we have a very sophisticated antioxidant defense system. In other words, we have antioxidants our body makes that can neutralize those free radicals, but it's not enough. We have to get the rest of these antioxidants from our food or supplementation. Most of these antioxidants occur in our fruits and our vegetables. That's why we now recommend 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables each day, because that's where the antioxidants are. But what we find is when we enhance that antioxidant defense system to its optimal level, it's like painting your car. It protects the metal so that the rust doesn't get to it. Oxidation does not occur. So think of antioxidants like that fine quality paint you put on your car. But then these same nutrients, these same supplements you take to boost that antioxidant defense system, to enhance it and optimize it, are the same antioxidants that you need to actually build up your natural immune system. The balance is the key. This is what you'll find in my book, is that on one side we've got that we're being attacked by the enemy, which is free radicals, but on the other side are the antioxidants. You simply want to have more antioxidants on board than the number of free radicals you produce, whether you're under stress, whether you're being exposed to a lot of toxins, whatever. Now, sure, it's wise to try to reduce your exposure to the pollutants in the air, food, and water. I like organic foods. I like purified water. I like people who quit smoking, so that when I become 80 and 85, I can look like this. And that's the key thing, because we're going to get older, folks. And we've all seen it, right? We've all seen those nice cars that have been kept up, they've been painted, the leather is perfect. Well, this is the way I want to. When I was speaking in Vancouver, a lady had come up before, and she was just fit, active, alive, bright-eyed, 91 years old. So I introduced her, and I'll tell you, that's what we're looking at. So tonight, I am going to go in individually and share some of the medical literature, what I've learned. It's going to be a little different than what you're used to seeing, because doctors don't study this, folks. That's why I call my book, What Your Doctor Does Not Know About Nutritional Medicine May Actually Be Killing You. So what we're going to do here is we start to understand that chronic degenerative diseases is a process. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't wake up one day with Alzheimer's dementia. You don't wake up one day and, whoops, I've got cancer, I get that heart attack. What it is, it's very small changes occurring over decades that creates chronic degenerative diseases. This gives you and I an opportunity to intervene, even now, no matter what your age is, to intervene and either slow down the process or reverse the process. And I'm serious, I see it every day in my clinical practice now that I pretty much have focused and specialized in nutritional medicine. Heart disease is what I'm going to start. Do you realize, folks, heart disease is not, and I stress that, is not a disease of cholesterol. It is an inflammatory disease. Now, it just came out in the AP. This is something we have been taught since the late 70s, that our arteries were just clogging up because we had too much cholesterol running around. That is not true, folks. I've been preaching this for 7 years. And what happens is it's very well established in the medical literature that over half the people who have heart attacks actually have normal cholesterol levels. It is this low-grade chronic inflammation that is causing heart disease, stroke, ruptured aneurysms, peripheral vascular disease, all of the vascular diseases that millions and millions of us have. But you know, wouldn't it make logical sense that you would sit there and say, well, what causes the inflammation in the beginning? Wouldn't it be wise just to cut those out and not even have to worry about trying to take a drug to counteract that inflammation? I mean, that's what I would do. Well, this is the New England Journal of Medicine, January 14th, 1999. And it is a review article called Heart Disease or Atherosclerosis, an Inflammatory Disease. And it actually goes into the causes of inflammation. LDL cholesterol is really not bad. Native LDL is fine. It only becomes bad once it becomes oxidized by these excessive free radicals. And if you have abundant antioxidants on board to neutralize the free radicals you produce, and this LDL does not become oxidized, you're going to be fine. Then LDL is not bad. And that's what we're finding. Folks, it's the oxidized LDL cholesterol that is bad. Another thing that causes it is homocysteine. Now, a lot of us don't even know what homocysteine is. But it's a byproduct of protein metabolism, and the protein that's specific is methionine. Well, what we have found out is homocysteine, when it goes up just a little bit, it creates tremendous inflammation of the artery. What they have found now, the research has shown beyond any shadow of a doubt that over about 15% of every heart attack and stroke in North America, including Canada, is the result of elevated homocysteine levels alone in your bloodstream, which can be reversed just by taking folic acid, B6, and B12. Why aren't doctors checking it? You know, what's going on here? You know, why don't they do it? You know, it's just amazing to me. What is happening is this is something that we see. And that's why we're seeing things that doctors don't know and don't understand in nutritional medicine that can be killing you. But let's look at a fatty meal. Now, I know you have McDonald's up here. I've seen them. I haven't gone to any yet. But what happens is you go in and have a Big Mac, French fries, and a Coke, supersize it, and we have checked your arteries, your radial artery, through ultrasound after that, and we have found that that artery goes into spasm 4 to 6 hours after that meal. That fatty meal in itself causes tremendous inflammation. Now, if you go out and have that same meal, but you take some vitamin E and vitamin C with that meal, your artery goes into spasm, but only about 4 to 6 minutes. 25% of us in North America have insulin resistance. Let me explain. We are infatuated, literally, with a high-carb, low-fat diet. Because why, folks? Because we've been told fat's the bad actor, right? Stay away from fat. But the carbs, man, there's nothing wrong with carbs. Go have your bagel. You know, have all the carbs you want because there's no fat in it. I mean, that's what we run out and we do. And I've just told you 10 minutes ago, jeepers, heart disease has nothing to do with cholesterol other than it becomes oxidized, LDL cholesterol. We need cholesterol to live. I mean, we need it to build good cells, to build hormones, to provide life-giving functions. Now, we don't need homocysteine. Homocysteine is a byproduct of just protein metabolism. The lower that is, the better. But here again, here we are looking at eating carbohydrates and not even worried about it. But let me tell you, folks, carbohydrates, see, are simply long chains of sugar that the body's able to absorb at various rates. For example, if you take white bread, white flour, pasta, rice, and potatoes, we actually absorb those sugars faster than if we're slapping table sugar on our tongue. That blood sugar rises, and it stimulates the release of insulin, which is your storage hormone. That storage hormone is going to drive that sugar into the cell to be either utilized in the muscle or stored in fat. Well, then that blood sugar drops down, and whoops, we get hungry again, and after that it actually bottoms out, and we're looking around and we're eating again, and we're just doing that day in and day out, over and over. It's kind of like hollering wolf all the time. We just become less sensitive to our own insulin. That is called insulin resistance. So what happens, folks, is that we think on blood sugar. In fact, I'll never forget, doctors are trained. We have about 2 years of what we call didactic medicine. We just sit in the classroom and just study, study, study. But our last 2 years of medical school, we actually get to get in the hospital and actually practice and learn medicine. So the first day I was on my clinical rotation, my 3rd year of medical school, I was in a surgery rotation at the University of Colorado at the VA. And I'll never forget the nurses running down about 3 hours into my day saying, gee, we have a diabetic patient who's in an insulin shock. He got too much insulin during surgery. You need to come down and give him IV sugar. So I'm just running down the hallway. They hand me this big, huge syringe. And I've never done an IV in my life. And I'm sitting there going, I'm just starting to sweat bullets. And I get in there and this guy's sweating. And I'm going, boy, good for you. So I get in there and he's out cold as a cucumber, and I get in there, and I draw back, and I know I'm in the vein, I start shooting it in, and I don't even have a tenth of it in. And I look up, and he's looking at me eyeball to eyeball, and he says, what are you doing? I look, and that was so impressive to me. I'd barely given him any. He goes from coma to bright alert because we think on sugar. Our body wants to control blood sugar. But what happens is, when we become less sensitive to our own insulin, the body responds by making more insulin to hammer that sugar into the cell to control blood sugars. So as those insulin levels begin to rise, what happens to you and I is the syndrome X, or metabolic syndrome. Many changes occur. Our blood pressure goes up. We start to see cholesterol go up. We start to see the central obesity, because what happens first is our muscle cells become less sensitive to our own insulin before the fat cells. And so what happens is those fat cells just start to build up, and whoop, there it is. And we have this tremendous obesity problem. Then we see LDL cholesterol going up, total cholesterol going up, triglycerides go shooting up off the wall. And that good cholesterol goes shooting down, and we begin to clot more because fibrinogen levels go up. When you have full-blown syndrome X, and all of these create tremendous oxidative stress, including those elevated insulin levels in your bloodstream, you have a 20-fold increased risk of developing heart disease or stroke. That's phenomenal, folks. And yet, do you know what? Doctors don't treat this. They do not treat insulin resistance. We wait until you develop the high blood pressure. Oh, we'll treat that. We'll wait until you develop the elevated cholesterol and the triglycerides. We'll treat that. And we'll treat it when you become diabetic, because that's what happens. This is kind of the pattern that we see. If you look at that upper line, now look at the graph. This is about 20 years of time. And that top, it's supposed to be orange, but the top line is what we call insulin resistance. And you start back here, when you start to become resistant to your own insulin, and it starts to shoot up, look at what happens to insulin production, which is your second line, which is the green line. Now, whoops, it goes right up with the insulin resistance. But over time, what happens is the blood sugars stay normal because we've got those insulin levels up, pushing this sugar into our bloodstream, or into the cells. But then, after about 15 years, the beta cells peter out, and whoops, there goes the insulin production down, and there goes the blood sugar up. That's when we start to look at this. But way back here, what we find is your arteries begin to age a third faster than they should. In other words, what you'll find is for every third birthday, add a fourth. And we're getting old fast enough. So when we actually make the diagnosis of diabetes, 60% of those patients already have major cardiovascular disease. And in fact, in 1970, 80% of our diabetics died of cardiovascular death. Do you know what the figure is in the year 2002? 80% still are dying of cardiovascular death. We have done nothing to reduce it. You can actually, with lifestyle changes, correct the underlying insulin resistance. Because we have found when you exercise modestly, you become much more sensitive to your own insulin. And if you start to eat in such a way as you do not spike that blood sugar, that's eating those carbohydrates that release their sugar slower. really good whole grains, eating whole foods, fruits and vegetables. They're low glycemic. They don't spike their blood sugar because they're filled with fiber. Then you turn around and you actually eat good protein and good fat. Well, you become much more sensitive to your own insulin. You actually stimulate the opposite of insulin called glucagon, which neutralizes. And what glucagon does, it takes fat from the cells and you utilize it. Blood pressure goes down. Triglyceride levels go down. Cholesterol goes down. And so what we find, that's what's critical. But then also, if you take nutritional supplements, we know that minerals called chromium, vanadium, magnesium, make you much more sensitive to your own insulin. All these antioxidants I'm going to talk about today, they're going to make you more sensitive to your own insulin. And when you do this, and you combine all three, and folks, let me tell you, if I get them to take supplements, they get a little better. If I get them to exercise, they get a little better. If I get them to eat right, they do a little better. If I can get to do 2 out of the 3, they're a little better. When I can convince my patients to do all 3 of those, it is phenomenal. But Matt came into my office, and he was way down the line because he was 23, weighed 310 pounds, big man, he was around 6'3". But he wanted to go to the Peace Corps, and he started telling me, gee, I'm drinking a lot of water, I'm going to the bathroom in the middle of the night a lot, I don't feel good, I'm miserable. And so I drew just a random blood sugar on him, and it was 610. Now, normal in the U.S. shouldn't be above 110. He was actually in diabetic ketoacidosis. I had to put him in the hospital. Turned around, and I gave him IV insulin. I couldn't get his insulin to really respond much, so I actually consulted the endocrinologist. He literally had to give him 90 units of insulin morning and night to control his blood sugar. And we let him go. I called Matt. He had been a patient of mine for years. I called Matt in. I got him on this program. And we started to get him to eat right, exercise, and take some basic cellular nutrition that I'll explain later. Turned around, and he just got better and better and better. And he was being followed by the endocrinologist. But in 4 months, he came back to me and he says, Dr. Strand, my blood sugars are normal. And I says, well, that's good, Matt. And I said, no, you don't understand what I'm saying. He says, my blood sugars are normal, and I'm not taking any insulin. And I said, I can't believe that. I mean, you're one of the worst diabetics I've seen. So we turned around, and I drew a fasting blood sugar the next day. It was 84, which is very, very normal. I gave him a sugar load. We give him a big sugar, and then we check his blood sugar 2 hours after that, and it was 86. Turned around and did a hemoglobin A1C, which is the amount of sugar in a red blood cell, and it was 4.8. Very, very normal. He was not diabetic anymore. And I literally had the toughest time writing a letter to the Peace Corps saying, yeah, Matt was an insulin-dependent diabetic at one time, but he no longer is diabetic, and he should be able to get into the Peace Corps, because he couldn't when he was taking insulin. You know what? They didn't believe me. So they had to have him be seen by his doctor, and sure enough, they said, Matt, you're not diabetic. And boom, off he goes to Africa. Turns around, and he comes back, and every 6 months they had to fly him out of the bush to check his blood sugars. He stayed non-diabetic. In fact, he really worked with it, stayed with, it was a little tougher over there, he said, but he stayed with his program. He exercised, he took his supplements, and he ate well. And I'll tell you what, he came back after his 2-year stint in the Peace Corps. He had lost 110 pounds. And he said to me, Dr. Strand, I haven't even tried to lose weight. It just came on. I was eating good over there. I just did not spike my blood sugar. See, here's the thing, folks. We have been taught by the media that the reason we're having this epidemic of diabetes in this country is because the fact we're getting overweight, right? Isn't that what you hear? But the truth is, the reason you're becoming diabetic is because of insulin resistance. The reason that you're becoming overweight is because of insulin resistance. It's part of the metabolic syndrome or syndrome X. So if you have this syndrome, I don't care, ladies, if you go to Weight Watchers, Jenny Craig, Diet Center, take the diabetic diet, you will not lose weight. You can't. It's part of the syndrome. This is why you can't lose weight. You correct the underlying insulin resistance, and I'll tell you what, that weight just starts falling off and you don't even try. It's very, very critical. But I always wonder why doctors aren't treating insulin resistance. If it starts back there and people become diabetic in 15, 20 years, why aren't we treating it way back there? The conclusion I've come, my personal opinion, we just don't have a drug for it. I will almost guarantee you, if we get a drug for it, Everybody will know about Syndrome X and the metabolic syndrome. Just like cholesterol, folks. Who teaches you about elevated cholesterol as being the cause of heart disease? Who takes out the full-page ad in the USA Today and any of your journals up here? I'll tell you what. It's the pharmaceutical companies. That's another economics of medicine. But let me share with you what I told you tonight. I now have 17 documented cases in my little practice. And folks, I've slowed down a little bit since I've started to go out and lecture and write and do that. And I have 17 who are not only well controlled using this program, they're no longer diabetic. If you stay with this, folks, it works. You can prevent. You do not have to end up being diabetic. You have to just develop some healthy lifestyles. Nutritional supplements, along with these healthy lifestyles, can either eliminate or significantly reduce every cause of inflammation of your arteries. So what I'm sharing with you, heart disease, if you look back, that's what we started out. Heart disease is an inflammatory disease. It's not a disease of cholesterol. The vitamin E's, the vitamin C's, the beta-carotenes help block that LDL cholesterol from becoming oxidized in the first place. Folic acid, B6 and B12 will literally lower your homocysteine levels to protect those arteries and prevent that inflammation. You turn around, that fatty meal is protected, especially if you start eating a healthy diet and you're getting your fruits and vegetables and you avoid the fatty meal. Those are lifestyle changes. You correct insulin resistance and all of a sudden you see the blood pressure go down. You start to see cholesterol levels go down. You don't become diabetic. You know, this is that. Now, cigarette smoking, it's a tough addiction, but there again, that's a lifestyle change. You have some control. You can become proactive with your own health. This is critical. All researchers agree that cancer takes decades to develop. In other words, it's these small changes that occur to the cell over 10, 20, 30 years, except in young children whose cells are dividing much more rapidly. But in the adult, we know now, in fact, Dr. Don Mallins, a biochemist out of Seattle, has taken normal breast tissue and followed this oxidative stress damage to that breast tissue all the way over to metastatic breast cancer. It's very predictable. In fact, oxidative stress now is a leading theory behind developing cancers. And this is what we find, that when you leave the DNA nucleus surrounded by excessive free radicals again, that DNA is damaged. In fact, they not only know it's damaged, they can look at the spiral staircase and know what part of that spiral staircase gets damaged the most frequently. Now, if that is not readily repaired, when that cell replicates, it takes that mutation to the next cell. And it gets damaged more and more. And what we find is you look on top, is carcinogenesis, or the development of cancer, is a progression. And that mutated cell gets damaged more, and then it gets damaged more. And then all of a sudden we have a pre-malignant or pre-cancerous cell. The next stage is cancer itself. Well, what we are finding, and what's really exciting about the medical literature now, is because doctors diagnose cancer way over here at the end stage. In fact, the last time I had a patient come in with lung cancer, we took an x-ray, found it, he had some chest pain, looked at it, it was already spread. And he was not a surgical candidate. And I'll never forget the oncologist coming in and talking to him and said, you know, you need to go through the chemotherapy. And you need to do this because you're not a surgical candidate. And so he asked him, well, what's the effect that this will have? He says, if you take my chemo, I can get you into remission about 40% of the time. That sounded really good to him. I was sitting there and I was listening to this discussion, and he just happened to ask a question, Doctor, what do you mean by remission? He says, well, if I can get you into remission, I can extend your life 3 months. That is the truth, folks. What happens is doctors are over here, and we have spent $25 billion in the last 30 years in cancer research only to see cancer deaths continue to increase over all that length of time. So what is happening now is everybody feels we need to go back and get to the planning stage and figure out what can we do to prevent cancer, because at the end stages we're not doing well. The only improvement we've seen is an earlier diagnosis through mammography or PSAs. We're able to more effectively treat the cancers or cut them out. But I'll tell you, that's the main thing. Now we're seeing some improvement in leukemias and lymphomas and these, but the solid tumors, we're not seeing much improvement. So chemoprevention is starting to be the key word. And what they have seen with these pre-malignant lesions, like leukoplakia in the inside of the mouth, or in women, cervical dysplasia. Now remember, these are precancerous lesions. The next stage is cancer, a true cancer itself. They have taken studies and given them antioxidants, 1, 2, or 3 in combination, and depending on what study you've seen, we've seen these precancer cells go all the way back to normal cells 50 to 70% of the time, just using 2 or 3 different antioxidants. See, the body has this tremendous ability to repair itself. It can actually cut out that section of DNA that is damaged and actually rebuild that spiral staircase. This is what our bodies have the ability to do. Tremendous repair system. So when you go back, you start to see regression, inhibition of cancer cells. You start to see it go all the way back to normal cells. But let me tell you folks, what I believe, because we're starting to see this, you can't study this that well in the human body, but what you'll find is that you can go ahead and actually see these people, if they have good antioxidants on board, to handle the free radicals they produce, right? There's no damage in the beginning. And if there is damage, the same nutrients you need to build that antioxidant defense system is your repair system. It can be readily repaired. Our immune system is our great protector. And we have actually T4 killer cells that goes around and picks up these abnormally growing cells and gobbles them up. This is what we need to do, folks. Day in and day out. Every day the rest of your life, you need to be taking high-quality nutritional supplements. But one of the things I think is really a big concern, one of the great fears, at least it's mine, because I've seen my patients. If you go out and visit a nursing home, you go out and visit someone, I'll tell you what, it's pretty sad to see someone who has actually lost their mind. Has no ability to think. Or you take a Parkinson's patient, has no ability to move, and you start to look at this. What we find is that it is caused by oxidative stress. In fact, you can take high dose of vitamin E alone. And in studies, and that's the way doctors do studies, they're always looking for the magic bullet, and I'll explain that later. But what happens is you can slow down Alzheimer's dementia. If you take a patient with moderate Alzheimer's dementia and you actually can slow it down to the point that they can stay home 3 years longer than those who took the sugar pill. Parkinson's disease improve. You start to see people getting better. But you know what? Since 80% of those cells are already dead, both in Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's, prevention becomes the key. This is what we're talking about. There are studies out there now that have shown that those patients who have the highest levels of antioxidants in their bloodstream, compared to those who have the lowest in their bloodstream, actually have 2 to 3-fold decreased risk of developing Alzheimer's dementia. Remember, the heart is really a pump, and it's pumping blood. And when that heart muscle weakens, then we call it congestive heart failure, and if it really becomes weak, it really dilates. We call that cardiomyopathy. The only thing we can do for those patients, and we give them a ton of drugs, but we barely help them, is to offer them a heart transplant. But what we have found is these people with this cardiomyopathy and congestive heart failure are significantly depleted in a very important nutrient called coenzyme Q10. And this coenzyme Q10 is necessary for the engine or the battery of the cell to create energy. That's in the mitochondria that I talked about earlier. And so what happens is you need CoQ10. Well, what happens to these people, they're just out there trying to compensate for that weakened state of that heart, and after a time, it just depletes out. So now that we have CoQ10 and we can measure it, many of the researchers have started to take CoQ10 and say, let's give it to these people in supplementation, see what happens. Well, you know what happens? 80% of the time, they get a significant improvement in that heart function. In fact, sometimes it is dramatic. There have been over 9 worldwide clinical trials involving over 6,000 patients that have been double-blind, placebo-controlled studies, the kind of studies doctors love. And what happens is 80 to 85% of those patients see significant improvement, and they only find that, one person in those 6,000 had to drop the CoQ10 because of nausea. They're just very well tolerated because it's a natural nutrient. When I was in high school, I used to run track. And when I ran for the University of South Dakota track team. Well, one of my best friends grew up 2 years behind me, followed me, and he was on the track team too. He came out to Rapid City, actually worked in the Black Hills. He was working at where they're doing the carving of Crazy Horse now, next to Mount Rushmore. and he ran the restaurant. He came into my office 4 years ago, and he says, Ray, something's going on. I just don't feel good. My heart feels like it's jumping out of my chest. And so I checked Wayne, and I listened to him, and sure enough, it sounded like a washing machine. I mean, it was just beating irregular, jumping all over. And I says, Wayne, we got to put you in the hospital. So I put him in the hospital, took an X-ray, and he had this huge dilated heart, massive heart. So we did an echocardiogram, and that's a sound wave study of the heart. And we checked how strong the heart was beating. We call that an ejection fraction. And normal should be 50 to 70%, and Wayne's was 17%. We got the cardiologists involved, they catheterized him. What we found out is Wayne had had a viral infection of his heart about 3 months earlier, kind of a flu-like, and it damaged his heart. And it took that long to waste all this CoQ10 and get to this weakened state. With all of our drugs, with everything we did, we got him up to an ejection fraction of a little over 20%. And the doctor looked at him and says, the only thing we can offer you, Wayne, is to go on the heart transplant list. I knew about this time. I was studying it, turned around and I got him on my cellular nutrition, but I gave him high-dose CoQ10. And I wasn't even seeing him. He was seeing the cardiologist. And Wayne came back about 4 months later and says, Ray, I haven't been able to work all this. I need to go on disability. All my friends are telling me go on total disability. And I says, yeah, Wayne, normally you do. And this was my first case. I didn't know what was going on. I just happened to ask Wayne, well, how are you doing? You know, I need to put this down. He says, well, I'm riding my bike 5 miles a day, and I'm running 2 miles a day. And you go, whoo, Wayne, if you're doing that, I can't put down you're disabled. We better check another echo. So I did another echocardiogram. His ejection fraction was 51%. It was all the way back to normal. Then I turned around, and the next day I saw the cardiologist in the doctor's lounge, and I was so excited to go up and talk to the doctor about Wayne's case. You know, of course, when you talk about nutrition and nutritional supplements in the doctor's lounge, you've got to go over to the corner and whisper. And so over there whispering in that, and I mean, Dr. Teixeira, he just couldn't believe this. So he said, you know, he walks out of the doctor's lounge, calls up my patient Wayne, says, Wayne, I want you to come into my office so I can do an echocardiogram on my machine. And so he did, and Wayne got in there about 2 weeks later. I got the report about a week and a half after that, and on his machine, his ejection fraction was 58%. And I couldn't wait to see him, the next time in the doctor's lounge. So we did, and he's a good guy. He knows where I'm coming from, and he said, you know, Ray, you talked to me about these studies and about CoQ10. You sound like the doctor who's on the radio show in New York. I was trained in Cornell, and would come in to work to the hospital, and he was talking about this study causing a health benefit and this one doing this. But when we got to the doctor lounge, did we really run him down? We would run him up one side and down the other, and Jim, the surgeon, was the worst. And he says, I'll never forget, we'd been listening to this guy on the radio coming in, and Jim was in the doctor's lounge ranting and raving about this guy, how bad it was, all he could say. Until his partner said, Jim, if you feel that way about supplements, why do you take them? And he says, well, that's in case I'm wrong. If none of those are going to get you, I'll tell you what, degenerative arthritis is going to get you. And I know that because 80% of us will have some form of arthritis over the age of 50. And this is the most common chronic degenerative disease. In fact, how do doctors treat this? Man, we get out our Motrins, our Aleve, naproxen, anything we can do, these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. In fact, I'm going to have another book coming out next fall. It's already been written on adverse drug reactions because properly prescribed and properly administered medication is the fourth leading cause of death in the U.S. and Canada. Now, let me say that. Properly prescribed and properly administered medication is the fourth leading cause of death in our countries. If you add improperly prescribed or improperly taken medication, it becomes the third leading cause of death, 180,000 deaths each and every year. Over 2 million hospital admissions in the U.S. alone with adverse drug reactions. 100,000 of those admissions are due to these non-steroidal anti-inflammatories because of upper GI bleeding. And 16,000 of those patients die in the U.S. alone for treating arthritis. The arthritis won't kill them, but the drugs they take will. Now, you take something like glucosamine sulfate. It not only improves the pain, but it builds up the joint fluid and it builds up the cartilage. And these people do much better. We've actually seen it slows down the progression and in some cases reverses the degenerative arthritis. So what we want to do at this time is talk to you about nutritional medicine and understand how are we getting these kind of results? How is this happening? You see, doctors, researchers are trying to find out the magic bullet. You know, when they do a study, they look at vitamin E, or maybe they'll look at vitamin C, or selenium, or magnesium, or beta-carotene. You know, they want to know what the magic bullet is. That's the way we do our research. They look at vitamin E as if it's a drug. Folks, vitamin E is not a drug. It's simply a nutrient we should be getting from our food. But because we can supplement now, we can get it at levels you can't obtain from your foods. But nutritional medicine for the last 50 years has gotten the disease drug orientation from the doctors. All of the complementary medicine people have been looking for that nutritional deficiency. They might do a hair sample, you know, they might do blood, they might do urine, they might do a muscle testing, they might do everything to see what you might need a little more of or a little less of. But see, the problem, folks, is not a nutritional deficiency. It is oxidative stress. The medical literature shows us this. So what we find is that we need to back up and really look at cellular nutrition. This is the key. In other words, vitamin E is a great antioxidant, but it's the best one in the cell membrane. Vitamin C is a great antioxidant, but it's the best one in plasma. Glutathione is the best intracellular antioxidant. But all of these antioxidants need the so-called antioxidant minerals to work. They need the selenium, manganese, zinc, copper. In fact, there's studies, University of Arizona did a study on selenium. 200 micrograms. And they found that if you take 200 micrograms of selenium compared to taking a sugar pill, you had a significant decreased risk, about a 70% decreased risk of prostate cancer, 60% decreased risk in colon cancer, 30% decreased risk in lung cancer, just with selenium. So everybody goes out, oh, we need selenium. We'll go out and buy selenium for cancer. But you see, selenium is not the key. That intracellular glutathione needs a molecule of selenium to work. If you have all the glutathione in the world on board in your cells, but you do not have the selenium, it can't do its job. There's a synergistic effect, folks. You know, you find that vitamin C not only is a great antioxidant, but it can replenish vitamin E and that intracellular glutathione. In other words, it can make them be used over and over and over again. That is synergy. That is what happens when you start to apply cellular nutrition. All of these antioxidants need the B cofactors. They need the folic acid, B6 and B12 at these optimal levels. That is what's key. So what we do is that we know that we have synergy. We know when we do that, the last slide showed that it enhances our antioxidant defense system, it optimizes our immune system and our repair system by simply applying cellular nutrition. So it creates synergy. So 1 + 1 is not 2. We find that antioxidants not only work in different areas of the body, but they work against different types of free radicals. And you need them all, folks. You want to have all the health benefits that the medical literature shows. The most amazing thing to me, as I've researched over 2,000 of these studies in the medical literature today, is the fact that the overwhelming majority show a health benefit just by taking one nutrient at these optimal levels. So what happens is, as you start to look at it, this is the key. You want to find that when you combine these together and you provide cellular nutrition, it is much greater, and no one is doing these studies. In fact, if you take one antioxidant at optimal levels, it can actually become a pro-oxidant or create oxidative stress. That is why you'll see reports coming out of the medical literature that, oh, this is bad. You know, you take beta-carotene and you smoke, it can cause increased risk of lung cancer, not decrease. Because, see, they're taking one nutrient and trying to make it into a drug. These are not drugs. These are just natural nutrients. That's what's key. And what happens is, this synergy provided by all these nutrients actually is what controls oxidative stress. This is what enhances that immune system, that antioxidant defense system, and that repair system. That is what's critical. Now, RDAs, recommended dietary allowance, which most physicians get confused. This is where I think we lose a lot of doctors, is they start to think, and they were taught, that all you need are RDA levels of food. And if you really went out and ate the right kinds of food, you could get all the RDA levels. Now, studies have shown, when we've gone out and studied large populations, No one, zip, zero, get all the RDAs of all the nutrients. And yet, theoretically, it's possible. But you see, you got to look at, well, what are RDAs? RDAs were developed in the 1930s and 40s as the minimal requirement to avoid what we call acute deficiency diseases. Diseases like scurvy or pellagra or rickets. That's why RDAs were developed. And in the 50s, they started to use it as a guideline for the minimal amount for normal growth and development. But let me tell you, folks, I have studied the literature for the last 7 years on chronic degenerative diseases. RDAs have absolutely nothing to do with chronic degenerative diseases. Example, the RDA of vitamin E is 10 IUs. You do not begin to see a health benefit in the medical literature until you get over 100 international units of vitamin E. Well, that RDA, some places it's 30 IUs, but that health benefit seems to increase all the way up over 400 IUs. There's even some studies at 800, but most everybody will agree now the optimal level is 400 IUs of vitamin E. Well, just go out and eat 400 IUs of vitamin E. You only need to eat 33 heads of spinach or 27 pounds of butter or 5 pounds of wheat germ. Dr. Wentz told me he bought a 5-pound jar of wheat germ and it took him 2.5 years to get it down. You know, vitamin C, you take a look at that and you say 60 milligrams is the RDA, but you do not begin to see a health benefit in the medical literature until you get over 1,000 milligrams up to 2,000 milligrams. Where you have to go out and eat 18 oranges or 180 apples. I mean, you just cannot do it, folks. There is no way to get these levels. The only way, you have to supplement and we want to supplement a healthy diet, not a bad diet. So I don't care if you feel perfectly healthy, wealthy, and wise. This is what is going to protect your health. This is cellular nutrition. Everybody needs to exercise modestly, do something they enjoy. They need to eat a high-fiber, low-fat diet, getting in 7 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables each and every day, and take cellular nutrition. Now, all I do when I get someone who comes in with chronic fatigue fibromyalgia or MS, or they have cancer, I know that they have more oxidative stress than my healthy patients. So what I do is I start to use optimizers. And we call the optimizers are added to this basic cellular nutrition because they are very potent antioxidants and the synergistic effect is phenomenal. But what you have to understand is that balance is the key. We need to have more free radicals or more antioxidants on board than the free radicals we produce. This is what is called cellular nutrition can offer you that. And that's what I'm doing. And if I have someone that's under a lot of oxidative stress, in fact, the MS patients, you remember I told you about Carol Ann Rao? They have shown in the medical literature that when an MS patient goes through a flare-up or an exacerbation, they've checked the amount of oxidative stress and compared it to those MS patients that were stable. And they go shooting up off the wall. So I've taught my chronic fatigue fibromyalgia, my rheumatoids, my lupus, and my MS patients, when they have a flare-up, they just need to take more antioxidants. Carol Ann Rao told me that 2 years ago, she had 3 episodes of double vision, and that's very scary for the patient with MS because they can go blind. Well, she called Scripps Institute to go in to get her burst of steroids. She was taking 12 of the proflavanol at that point, and that's what level I've had to use with the MS patients. And she just jumped it to 15. Before she got in to see her doctor, all 3 times the double vision was gone. She never received any of the bursts of steroids. This is what I'm finding. You have to capture the disease. You have to bring oxidative stress back under control. And you can just tell it. I can take someone who comes in now who's just fatigued. I can get them just on cellular nutrition, maybe add a little bit of grapeseed. And I'll tell you, within 6 weeks, you can just see the color change. They look better. They're doing better. This is the key. Folks, I am here not because I've read a lot of labels on nutritional supplements or I've read a lot in regards to nutritional medicine in the medical literature. I am here because of the results I've seen in my patients. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Like my wife mentioned, it's a great tool in the toolbox. It's something that you can really look at and take a handle, and this is why we're out spreading the word. Thank you very much.